Chapter 63220. They headed back the way they had come. The moon had disappeared behind a bank of clouds. It was dark, but at least the thunderpath was quieter now. The only monster they heard was far off in the distance. The cats crossed the path together and pushed their way through the hedge on the other side. Firepaw could feel his muscles growing stiff with tiredness as they hurried on. Bluestar kept up a swift pace with her nose thrust forward and her tail high. Tireclaw loped beside her. Firepaw followed a few paces behind with Graypaw, but Ravenpaw was flagging. "Keep up, Ravenpaw," Tireclaw growled over his shoulder. Ravenpaw flinched and bounded forward until he caught up with Firepaw and Graypaw. "Are you okay?" Firepaw asked. "Yes," Ravenpaw panted, not meeting Firepaw's eyes. "Just a bit tired." They scrambled down a deep ditch and up the other side. "What did Tigerclaw say when he came out of the cave?" Firepaw meowed, trying not to sound too curious. "He wanted to check that we were still guarding the entrance," replied Graypaw. "Why?" Firepaw hesitated. "Did you sense anything strange about him?" he asked. "Only that damp old cave," Graypaw mewed, looking surprised. "He seemed a little edgy," ventured Ravenpaw. "He wasn't the only one," Graypaw meowed, looking at the black cat. "What do you mean?" asked Ravenpaw. "Just that the fur on your neck stands up whenever you see him these days," whispered Graypaw. "You nearly jumped out of your skin when he came out of that cave." "He just surprised me, that's all," Ravenpaw protested. "You have to admit, it was a bit creepy by Mother Mouth." "I suppose so," agreed Graypaw. The cat slipped under a hedge into a cornfield that glowed in silver in the moonlight, and followed the ditch that ran around its edge. "So what was it like inside, Firepaw?" Graypaw demanded. "Did you see the moonstone?" "Yes, I did. It was amazing." Firepaw felt his fur tingle at the memory. Graypaw shot him an admiring glance. "So it's true. The rock really does shine underground." Firepaw didn't reply. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the image of the moonstone that dazzled his mind. Then pictures from his dream crowded into his head, and his eyes shot open. Bluestar was right. They had to get back to the camp as quickly as they could. Ahead, Tigerclaw and Bluestar had leaped through a fence, out of the cornfield. The apprentices followed, squeezing under the fence onto an earth track. It was the path that led past the two-leg nest and the dogs. Firepaw looked up and saw Bluestar and Tigerclaw trotting tirelessly together, silhouetted against the skyline tinged with red. The sun would be rising soon. "Look," he called to Graypaw and Ravenpaw. An unfamiliar cat had jumped out in front of the two warriors. "It's a loner," hissed Graypaw. The three apprentices hurried forward. The stranger was a stout black and white tom, shorter than the warriors but well muscled. "This is Barley," Bluestar explained to the apprentices as they caught up. "He lives near this two-leg nest."
"Hi," meowed the cat. "I haven't seen any of your clan for some moons. How are you, Bluestar?"
"I'm well, thank you," replied Bluestar. "And you, Barley? How's the prey been running since we last passed this way?"
"Not so bad," replied Barley, with an amiable gleam in his eye. "One good thing about two legs, you always find plenty of rats nearby."
The black and white tom went on.
"You seem in more of a hurry than usual. Is everything all right?"
Tireclaw looked at Barley. A growl rumbled deep in his chest. Firepaw could sense that the warrior was suspicious of the loner's curiosity. "I don't like to be away from my clan too long," Bluestar answered smoothly.
"As always, Bluestar, you are tied to your clan like a queen to her kits,"
observed Barley, not unkindly.
"What is it you want, Barley?"
asked Tireclaw. Barley flashed him a reproachful look.
"I just wanted to warn you that there are two dogs here now. You'd be safer going back into the cornfield instead of past the yard."
"We know about the dogs. We saw them earlier," Tireclaw began impatiently. "We are grateful to you for the warning," interrupted Bluestar. "Thank you, Barley. Until next time." Barley flicked his tail.
"Have a safe journey."
He meowed as he bounded away up the track. "Come," ordered Bluestar. She pushed her way through the long grass between the path and the fence that led back into the cornfield. The three apprentices followed, but Tireclaw hesitated.
You trust the word of a loner?
He meowed. Bluestar stopped and turned to face him. Would you rather face those dogs?
They were tied up when we passed them earlier,
Tireclaw pointed out. They may be untied now. We're going this way, meowed Bluestar. She ducked under the fence into the field. Firepaw slipped after her, followed by Graypaw, Ravenpaw, and finally Tireclaw. By now the sun had lifted its head above the horizon. The hedgerows sparkled with dew, promising another warm day. The cats padded along the edge of the ditch. Firepaw looked down into the deep gully, steep-sided and filled with nettles. Firepaw could smell prey scent. There was something familiar about the bitter odor, but it was one he hadn't smelled for a long time. An ear-splitting squeal made Firepaw whip around. Ravenpaw was struggling and clawing at the earth. Something had a hold of his leg and was dragging him down into the ditch.
Rats!
Spat Tireclaw.
Barley has sent us into a trap!
Before they could react, all 5 cats were surrounded. Huge brown rats swarmed out of the ditch, squeaking shrilly. Firepaw could see their sharp front teeth glinting in the early dawn light. Suddenly, one leaped onto Firepaw's shoulder. Fiery pain shot through his shoulder as the rat sank its teeth into his flesh. Another grasped his leg between his powerful jaws. Firepaw flung himself down and writhed madly, trying to shake free. He knew the rats were not as strong as he was, but there were so many of them. Yowls, hisses, and spits told him that the others were also being attacked. Firepaw slashed fiercely with his claws, slicing out at a rat that held onto his leg. It let go, but another one gripped his tail. Fast as lightning, powered by fear and rage, Firepaw fought and hacked at his attackers. Twisting his head around, he sank his teeth into the rat that had embedded itself into his shoulders. He felt the bones of his neck crunch in his mouth and his body go limp before it fell away onto the dirt track. Hope my voice isn't too dead inside. I'm going to die. Firepaw gasped with pain as yet another rat leaped onto his back and sank his teeth in. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a flash of white fur. For a moment, he was confused. Then he felt the rat being dragged off him. Firepaw spun around to see Barley flinging the rodent into the ditch. Without hesitating, Barley glanced around and sprinted over to Bluestar. She was writhing on the path, covered in rats. In a flash, Barley had the spine of one between his teeth and was plucking it off her with practiced ease. He spat it onto the ground and grabbed another in his mouth as Bluestar thrashed beneath him. Firepaw rushed over to Graypaw, who was being attacked from both sides by 2 smaller rats. Firepaw lunged at the nearest one, giving it a bite that left it dead. Graypaw managed to turn and pin down the other with his claws. He grabbed it with his teeth and flung it into the ditch as hard as he could. It did not come back.
They're running away,
Tireclaw yowled. Sure enough, the remaining rats were fleeing down into the safety of the ditch. Firepaw could hear the scrabbling of the small paws disappearing into the nettles. The bites in his shoulder and hind leg stung sharply. He looked carefully at his fur, wet and matted with blood, its sharp tang mingling with the stench of rats. Firepaw looked around for Ravenpaw. Graypaw was standing at the edge of the nettles, mewing encouragement as Ravenpaw pulled himself out of the ditch, muddy and stung. A young rat was still hanging onto his tail. Firepaw bounded over and finished it off quickly while Graypaw helped to pull Ravenpaw over the top of the ditch. Now Firepaw looked for Bluestar. He saw Barley first, standing at the top of the ditch, scanning the depths for more rats. Bluestar was lying on the path nearby. Alarmed, Firepaw dashed to his leader's side. The thick gray fur at the back of her neck was drenched with blood. Bluestar, he mewed. Bluestar did not reply. A furious yowl made Firepaw look up. Tireclaw leaped on top of Barley and pinned him to the ground.
You sent us into a trap,
he snarled. I didn't know the rats were here, spat Barley, his paws scrabbling in the dust as he struggled to stand up.
Why did you send us this way?
Hissed Tireclaw. The dogs were tied when we passed them earlier. The 2-legged unties them at night. They guard his nest, Barley panted, wheezing under the weight of Tireclaw's massive paws. Tireclaw, Bluestar is injured, Firepaw burst out. Tireclaw released Barley at once. Barley got up and shook the dust from his coat. The great warrior bounded over to Bluestar's side and sniffed her wounds. Is there anything we can do? Firepaw asked. She's in the hands of StarClan now, meowed Tigerclaw solemnly, stepping back. Firepaw opened his eyes wide with shock. Did Tigerclaw mean that Bluestar was dead? His fur prickled as he looked down at his leader. Is this what the spirits at the Moonstone had warned her about? Graypaw and Ravenpaw joined them and stood beside their leader, horror-struck. Barley hung back, craning his neck to see what was happening. Bluestar's eyes were open but glazed, and her gray body lay motionless. She didn't even appear to be breathing. Is she dead? Whispered Ravenpaw. I don't know. We must wait and see, replied Tigerclaw. The five cats waited in silence as the sun began to climb into the sky. Firepaw found himself wordlessly begging StarClan to protect his leader, to send her back to them. Then Bluestar stirred. The end of her tail twitched, and she lifted her head. Bluestar? Mewed Firepaw, his voice trembling. It's all right, Bluestar rasped. I'm still here. I have lost a life, but it wasn't my ninth. Joy flooded Firepaw. He looked at Tigerclaw, expecting to see relief on his face, but the Dark Warrior was expressionless. Right, Tigerclaw meowed in a commanding tone. Ravenpaw, fetch cobwebs for Bluestar's wounds. Graypaw, find Marigold or Horsetail. The two apprentices dashed away. Barley, I think you should leave us now. Firepaw looked over to the loner who had fought so bravely to help them. He wanted to thank him, but under Tigerclaw's fierce gaze he didn't dare. Instead of speaking, Firepaw gave Barley a tiny nod. Barley seemed to understand, for he nodded in return and left without another word. Bluestar was still lying on the dirt track. Is everyone all right? She asked hoarsely. Tigerclaw nodded. Ravenpaw came charging back, his left forepaw wrapped in a thick wad of cobwebs. Here, he mewed. Should I put them on her wounds? Firepaw asked Tigerclaw. Yellowfang showed me how. Very well, agreed Tigerclaw. He walked away and scanned the ditch again, his ears pricked for more rats. Firepaw peeled a clump of cobwebs from Ravenpaw's paw and began to press them firmly onto Bluestar's wounds. She winced under his touch. If it had not been for Tigerclaw, those rats would have eaten me alive, she murmured, her voice tight with pain. It wasn't Tigerclaw who saved you, it was Barley, Firepaw whispered as he took more cobwebs from Ravenpaw. Barley? Bluestar sounded surprised. Is he here? Tigerclaw sent him away, Firepaw answered quietly. He thinks Barley sent us into a trap. And what do you think? And what do you think? Bluestar rasped. Firepaw didn't look up, but concentrated on pressing the last bit of cobweb into place. Barley is a loner. What would he gain by sending us into a trap only to rescue us from it? He mewed eventually. Bluestar laid down her head and closed her eyes again. Graypaw returned with some horsetail. Firepaw chewed the leaves and spat the juice onto Bluestar's wounds. He knew it would help stop infection, but he still wished Spotted Leaf were with him, with her knowledge of and confidence in healing. We should rest here while Bluestar recovers, announced Tigerclaw, padding up. No, Bluestar insisted. We must return to the camp. Narrowing her eyes in pain, she struggled to her paws. Let's keep going. The ThunderClan leader limped along the edge of the field. Tigerclaw walked at her side, his face dark with unknowable thoughts. The apprentices exchanged anxious glances and then followed. It is a long time since I saw you lose a life, Bluestar. Firepaw overheard Tigerclaw's whispered words. How many have you lost now? Firepaw couldn't help feeling surprised at Tigerclaw's open curiosity. That was my fifth, replied Bluestar quietly. Firepaw strained his ears, but Tigerclaw did not reply. He padded on, lost in thought. Chapter 17. Sunhigh came and went as the cats made their way through WindClan's old hunting grounds. Their heavy silence showed that they were still sore after the rat fight. Firepaw felt scratched and bitten all over. He could see Graypaw was limping occasionally, hopping on 3 legs to protect his injured back leg. But it was Bluestar who worried him most. Her pace was even, but it was even slower now, but she refused to stop and rest. The grim look on her face, clouded by pain, told Firepaw how much she wanted to reach the ThunderClan camp. Don't worry about ShadowClan warriors, she meowed through gritted teeth as Tigerclaw paused to sniff the air. You won't find any here today. How could she be so sure? Firepaw wondered. They picked their way carefully down the steep, rocky hillside that led to Four Trees, and joined the familiar trail that led home. It was late afternoon, and Firepaw began to think longingly of his nest and a plump helping of fresh kill. "I can still smell the stench of ShadowClan," Graypaw muttered to Firepaw as they trekked through ThunderClan's hunting grounds. "Perhaps the breezes carried it down from WindClan's territory," Firepaw suggested. He could smell it too, and his whiskers were trembling. Suddenly Ravenpaw stopped. "Can you hear that?" he mewed in a hushed voice. Firepaw strained his ears. At first he heard only the familiar sounds of the forest, leaves rustling, a pigeon calling. Then his blood ran cold. In the distance he could hear battle-hungry yowls and the shrill squeal of terrified kits. "Quick!" Bluestar howled. It is as StarClan warned me. Our camp is being attacked." She tried to leap forward, but stumbled. She pushed herself up and limped onward. Tireclaw and Firepaw pelted forward side by side. Graypaw and Ravenpaw followed, their tail fur bristled to twice its usual size. Firepaw forgot his soreness as he charged toward the camp. His only concern was to protect the clan. The sounds of battle grew louder and louder as he neared the camp entrance, and the stench of ShadowClan filled his nostrils. He was right behind Tireclaw as the cats dashed through the tunnel and into the clearing. They were met by a frenzy of fighting, ThunderClan cats battling furiously with ShadowClan warriors. The kits were out of sight, and Firepaw hoped they were safely hidden in the nursery. He guessed the weakest elders would be sheltering inside the hollow trunk of their fallen tree. Every corner of the camp seemed alive with warriors. Firepaw could see Frostfur and Goldenflower clawing and biting at a huge gray tom. Even the young tabby Queen Brindleface was fighting, even though she was very close to kidding. Darkstripe was locked in a fierce tussle with a black warrior. 3 of the elders, Small Ear, Patchpelt, and One Eye, were nipping bravely at a tortoiseshell who fought with twice their speed and ferocity. The returning cats hurled themselves into the battle. Firepaw caught hold of a tabby warrior queen, much larger than him, and sank his teeth deep into her leg. She yowled with pain and turned on him, lashing out with sharp claws and lunging at his neck with her teeth bared. He twisted and ducked to avoid her bite. She couldn't match his speed, and he managed to grasp her from behind and pull her down into the dirt. With his strong hind legs he clawed at her back till she squealed and struggled away from him, running headlong into the thick undergrowth that surrounded the camp. Firepaw glanced around to see that Bluestar had arrived. Despite her injuries, she was fighting another tabby. Firepaw had never seen her fight before, but even wounded, she was a powerful opponent. Her victim struggled to escape, but she held him tightly and clawed him so fiercely that Firepaw knew he would bear the scars of this fight for many moons. Then he saw a white ShadowClan cat with jet-black paws, dragging a ThunderClan elder away from the nursery. Firepaw remembered those unusual dark paws from the gathering. Blackfoot! The ShadowClan deputy made quick work of killing the elder, who had been guarding the kits, and began to reach into the bramble nest with one massive paw. The kits were squealing and mewing, undefended now as their mothers wrestled with other ShadowClan warriors in the clearing. Firepaw prepared to spring toward the nursery, but a claw sliced painfully down his side, and he whipped around to see a scrawny tortoiseshell leap on top of him. As he slammed into the ground, he tried to call out to the other ThunderClan cats that the kits were in danger. Fighting with all his strength to escape the tortoiseshell's grip, he wrenched his head around so he could see the bramble nest. Blackfoot had scooped 2 kits from their bedding already and was reaching in for a third. Firepaw saw no more as the tortoiseshell raked his belly with her hind claws. Firepaw scrabbled onto his feet and crouched low as if in defeat. The trick had worked before, and it worked now. As the tortoiseshell gripped him triumphantly and began to sink her teeth into Firepaw's neck, Firepaw sprang upward as hard as he could and flung the warrior away. He spun around and was on the winded warrior in an instant. This time he showed no mercy, plunging his teeth deep into the cat's shoulder. The bite sent the she-cat howling into the undergrowth. Firepaw jumped up, dashed over to the nursery, and thrust his head through the nursery entrance. Blackfoot was nowhere to be seen. Inside the nest, crouching over the terrified kits, was Yellowfang. Her gray fur was spattered with blood, and one of her eyes was painfully swollen. She looked up at Firepaw with a ferocious hiss. Then, realizing it was him, she yowled, They're okay. I'll protect them. Firepaw looked at her as she calmed the helpless kits, and Broken Star's dire warning about the Shadow Clan rogue flashed through his mind. He didn't have time to think about that now. He would have to trust Yellowfang. He nodded quickly and ducked back out of the brambles. There were now only a few Shadow Clan cats left in the camp. Ravenpaw and Greypaw were fighting side by side, lashing out at a Black Tom until he fled howling into the bushes. White Storm and Darkstripe chased the last two intruders out of the camp, sending them off with a few extra scratches and bites. Firepaw sat down, exhausted, and stared around the camp. It was devastated. Blood spattered the clearing, and tufts of fur drifted in the dust. The surrounding wall of undergrowth was ripped open where the invaders had crashed through. One by one, the ThunderClan cats gathered beneath the high rock. Greypaw came to sit by him, his sides heaving and blood trickling from a torn ear. Ravenpaw flopped down and began to lick a wound on his tail. The queens ran to the nursery to check on their kits. Firepaw found himself waiting tensely for their return, his view blocked by the other cats. He relaxed when he heard squeals and purrs of joy coming from the bramble nest. Frostfur wove her way back through the crowd, followed by Yellowfang. The White Queen stepped forward and addressed them. Our kits are all safe, thanks to Yellowfang. A Shadow Clan warrior killed Brave Rosetail and was trying to steal them from their nest, but Yellowfang fought him off. It was no ordinary Shadow Clan warrior either, Firepaw put in. He was determined to let the clan know how much they owed Yellowfang. I saw him. It was Blackfoot. The Shadow Clan deputy! Meowed Brindleface, who had fought so bitterly to protect the unborn kits in her swollen belly. There was a stir at the edge of the group, as Bluestar limped forward and made her way over to the apprentices. The grave expression on her face was enough to tell Firepaw that something was wrong. Spotted Leaf is with Lionheart, she murmured. He was injured in the battle. It looks bad. She turned her head toward the shadow on the far side of the high rock where the warrior lay, a motionless bundle of dusty golden fur. A high-pitched wail rose from Greypaw's throat, and he raced over to Lionheart. Spotted Leaf, who had been leaning over the ThunderClan deputy, stepped back to let the young apprentice share tongues for the last time with his mentor. As Greypaw's howl of grief echoed around the clearing, Firepaw's fur tingled and his blood ran cold. It was the cry he had heard in his dream. For a moment his head swam. Then he gave himself a shake. He had to keep calm, for Greypaw's sake. Firepaw looked at Bluestar, who nodded, and he padded over to join his friend by the high rock. He stopped for a moment beside Spotted Leaf. She looked exhausted and dull-eyed with grief. I can't help Lionheart now, she mewed quietly to him. He is on his way to join StarClan. She pressed her body against Firepaw's side, and he felt comforted by the touch of her warm fur. The other cats looked on in silence as the sun slowly set behind the trees. Finally Greypaw sat up and cried out, He's gone! He lay down again beside Lionheart's body and rested his head on his front paws. The rest of the clan walked silently forward to carry out their own grieving rituals for their beloved deputy. Firepaw joined them. He licked Lionheart's neck and murmured, Thank you for your wisdom. You taught me so much. Then he sat down beside Greypaw and began gently grooming his friend's ears. Bluestar waited until the other cats had left before padding quietly up. Greypaw didn't even seem to notice his leader's presence. Firepaw looked away as Bluestar spoke her last words to her old friend. Oh, what am I going to do without you, Lionheart? She whispered. Then she limped back to her den and crouched down outside, staring grief-stricken into the distance. She didn't even try to lick clean her bloody, matted fur. It was the first time Firepaw had seen her look utterly defeated, and he felt a chill run through him. He sat with Greypaw and Lionheart until the moon rose high. Ravenpaw joined him, and together they kept company with their grieving friend. Tireclaw strode over and briefly shared tongues with Lionheart. Firepaw waited to hear what words he would share with his warrior friend, but Tireclaw remained silent as he licked the matted fur. To Firepaw's confusion, the dark tabby's eyes seemed to be fixed on Ravenpaw rather than the fallen deputy. Spotted Leaf padded lightly around the camp, tending to wounds and battered nerves. Firepaw watched her approach Bluestar twice, but each time their leader sent her away to see others. Only when Spotted Leaf had attended to the wounds of all the other cats did Bluestar allow her to treat her bites and scratches. When she had finished, Spotted Leaf turned and walked back to her den. Bluestar stood and slowly hauled herself up onto the high rock. The clan cats seemed to have been waiting for her. As soon as she settled herself in her usual spot, they began to gather in the clearing below, unusually silent and somber-faced. Firepaw and Ravenpaw got stiffly to their paws and joined them, leaving Graypaw behind with Lionheart's body. The gray apprentice was still lying with his nose resting against Lionheart's cooling golden pelt. Firepaw guessed Bluestar would excuse Graypaw from the clan meeting this time. "It is nearly moon high," meowed Bluestar as Firepaw slipped into place next to Ravenpaw, "and it is once more my duty, much, much too soon, to name ThunderClan's new deputy." Her voice was tired and cracked with sadness. Firepaw looked from warrior to warrior. They were all looking expectantly at Tigerclaw. Even Whitestorm had turned to watch the dark tabby. From the bold expression on his face, and the way his whiskers twitched in anticipation, Tigerclaw seemed to agree with them. Bluestar took a deep breath and continued, "I say these words before the body of Lionheart, so that his spirit may hear and approve my choice." She hesitated. "I have not forgotten how one cat avenged the death of Redtail and brought his body back to us. ThunderClan needs this fearless loyalty even more now." Bluestar paused again and then meowed this name loud and clear. "Tigerclaw will be the new deputy of ThunderClan." There was a yowl of approval, with the loudest voices belonging to Darkstripe and Longtail. Whitestorm sat calmly, his eyes closed, his tail wrapped neatly around him. He was nodding slowly and approvingly. Tigerclaw lifted his chin proudly, his eyes half closed as he listened to the clan. Then he stalked through the crowd, accepting tributes with the smallest of nods, and leaped up onto the high rock beside Bluestar. "ThunderClan," he yelled, "I am honored to accept the position of clan deputy. I never expected to gain such high rank, but by the spirit of Lionheart, I vow to serve you as best I can." He gravely dipped his head, and fixing the crowd with his wide yellow eyes, and jumped down from the high rock. Firepaw heard Ravenpaw murmur, "Oh no," under his breath beside him. He turned to look curiously at his friend. Ravenpaw's head was hanging low. "She should never have chosen him," he muttered. "Are you talking about Tigerclaw?" Firepaw whispered. "He's wanted to be deputy ever since he took care of Redtail." Ravenpaw mewed. He stopped abruptly. "Took care of Redtail?" Firepaw echoed. His mind suddenly raced with questions. What did Ravenpaw know? At the gathering, had his account of the battle with the RiverClan been true? Was Tigerclaw responsible for Redtail's death? Chapter 18. "Are you telling Firepaw how I protected Redtail?" Firepaw felt a cold shiver ruffle the fur on the back of his neck. Ravenpaw whipped around, eyes wide with fear. Tigerclaw loomed over them, his lips drawn back in a menacing snarl. Firepaw jumped up and faced the new deputy. "He was just saying he wished you had been here to take care of Lionheart as well, that's all." He mewed, thinking quickly. Tigerclaw looked from one to the other, then stalked away in silence. Ravenpaw's green eyes clouded with terror, and he started to tremble uncontrollably. "Ravenpaw?" Firepaw meowed in alarm. But Ravenpaw didn't even look up at him. With his head held low, he slunk back to Graypaw and crouched next to him, pressing his skinny black body next to Graypaw's thick fur as if he was suddenly cold. Firepaw looked helplessly at his two friends as they huddled beside Lionheart's body. Not knowing what else to do, he padded over and settled himself beside them, ready to sit out the night. As the moon passed overhead, other cats came to join their vigil. Bluestar arrived last, once the camp was calm and quiet. She said nothing, but sat a little way off, gazing at her dead deputy with an expression of such unbearable grief that Firepaw had to look away. At dawn, a group of elders came to take Lionheart's body away to the burial place. Graypaw followed to help dig the hole where the great warrior would rest. Firepaw yawned and stretched. He felt chilled to the bone. Leaf fall was nearly here now, and the woods were clouded with mist, but above the leaves Firepaw saw a rosy morning sky. He watched Graypaw disappear into the dew-soaked undergrowth with their elders. Ravenpaw jumped to his paws and hurried back to the apprentice's den. Firepaw followed him slowly. By the time he arrived, the black cat was curled up with his nose tucked under his tail, as if asleep. Firepaw was too exhausted to speak. He circled around on his mossy bed and then settled down for a long sleep. Just my mic spot. My breathing might get a little annoying. Wake up! Firepaw heard Dustpaw's voice calling through the den entrance. He opened his eyes. Ravenpaw was already awake, sitting bolt upright with his ears pricked. Graypaw was stirring beside him. Firepaw was surprised to see the familiar gray shape. He hadn't heard him come back after burying Lionheart. Bluestar's called another meeting. Dustpaw hissed at them and ducked out of the ferns. The three apprentices crawled out of the warm den. The sun was already past its height, and the air felt cooler than before. Firepaw shivered, and his belly growled. He couldn't remember the last time he had eaten, and wondered briefly if he would have a chance to hunt today. Firepaw, Graypaw, and Ravenpaw hurried to join the crowd gathered below the high rock. Tarraclaw was speaking from his position beside Bluestar.
During the battle, our leader lost another life. Now that she has only 4 of her 9 lives left, I'm going to appoint a bodyguard to stay at her side constantly. No cat will be allowed to approach her unless the guards are present.
His amber eyes flicked to Ravenpaw and then back to the rest of the crowd.
Darkstripe and Longtail,
he continued, turning his gaze on the warriors.
You will act as Bluestar's guards.
Darkstripe and Longtail nodded importantly and sat taller. Bluestar now spoke. Her voice sounded gentle and calming after her deputy's commanding yowl. Thank you, Tigerclaw, for your loyalty. But the clan must understand that I am still here for them. No cat should hesitate to approach me, and I am happy to speak to anyone with or without my bodyguards. Her eyes darted briefly in Tigerclaw's direction. As the warrior code says, the safety of the clan is more important than the security of any single member. She paused, and her sky-blue gaze rested briefly on Firepaw. And now I wish to invite Yellowfang to join ThunderClan. Meows of surprise rose from some of the warriors. Bluestar looked at Frostfur, who nodded her agreement. The other queens looked on silently. Bluestar continued. Her actions last night proved that she is brave and loyal. If she wishes it, we would welcome her as a full member of this clan. From her place at the edge of the crowd, Yellowfang looked up at the clan leader and murmured, I am honored, Bluestar, and I accept your offer. Good, meowed Bluestar, her voice firm as if the matter was now closed. Firepaw purred with delight and nudged Graypaw. He was surprised to realize just how much Bluestar's public show of trust in Yellowfang meant to him. Bluestar began to speak again. Last night we successfully defended ourselves against ShadowClan, but they are still a great threat. The repair work we began this morning will continue. Our boundaries will be patrolled constantly. We must not assume that the war is over. Tireclaw stood up, his tail held high, and glared at the assembled cats. ShadowClan
attacked while we were away from camp, he growled. They chose their moment well. How did they know that the camp was so poorly defended? Do they have eyes inside our camp?
Firepaw froze in horror as Tireclaw fixed his cold stare on Ravenpaw. Some of the cats followed their new deputy's gaze and stared in puzzlement at the black apprentice. Ravenpaw looked at the ground and shifted his paws nervously. Tireclaw went on.
We still have a while before sunset. We must concentrate on rebuilding our camp. Meanwhile, if you suspect anything, or anyone, tell me. Be assured, anything you say will be in confidence.
He nodded to dismiss the clan. They then turned and began murmuring to Bluestar. The cats separated and began to move around the camp, assessing damage and forming work groups. Ravenpaw, Firepaw called, still shocked by Tireclaw's dark hint that his own apprentice had betrayed the clan. But Ravenpaw had already bounded away. Firepaw could see him offering to help Halftail and Whitestorm before rushing out to collect twigs so they could patch the holes in the boundary wall. Ravenpaw clearly didn't want to talk. Let's go and help him, suggested Graypaw. His voice was flat and exhausted. his eyes were dull. You go. I'll be there in a moment, Firepaw answered. First, I want to check on Yellowfang, see if she's okay after her fight with Blackfoot. He looked for Yellowfang in her nest by the fallen tree. She was stretched out in the shadows, her eyes thoughtful. Firepaw, she purred when she saw him. I'm glad you have come. I wanted to check that you were all right, Firepaw mewed. Old habits stay longer than old scents, eh? Meowed Yellowfang with a flash of her old spirit. I suppose so, Firepaw confessed. How are you feeling? This old leg injury is playing up again, but I'll be fine, Yellowfang told him. How did you manage to fight Blackfoot off? Firepaw asked, unable to keep the admiration out of his voice. Blackfoot's strong, but he's not a clever fighter. Fighting you was more of a challenge. Firepaw looked for the flicker of humor in the old cat's eyes, but there were none. She continued. I've known him since he was a kid. He hasn't changed. Bully, but no brains. Firepaw sat down beside her. I'm not surprised Bluestar asked you to join the clan, he purred. You certainly showed your loyalty last night. Yellowfang twitched her tail. Perhaps a truly loyal cat would have fought at the side of the clan that raised her. But then I'd be fighting for my 2 legs, Firepaw pointed out. Yellowfang shot him an admiring glance. Well said, youngster, but then, you have always been a thinker. Sorrow pierced Firepaw's heart as he remembered these were Lionheart's words too. Do you miss ShadowClan? He asked Yellowfang. Yellowfang blinked slowly. I miss the old ShadowClan, she mewed at last. The way it used to be. Until Broken Star became leader? Firepaw was curious. Yes, Yellowfang admitted softly. He changed the clan. She gave a wheezy laugh. He always knew how to give a good speech. He could make you believe a mouse was a rabbit if he set his mind to it. Perhaps that is why I was so blind to his faults. The old she-cat stared into the distance, lost in memories. Bet you can't guess who the new ShadowClan medicine cat is. Firepaw mewed, suddenly remembering what he had learned at the gathering. It felt like moons ago now. His words seemed to shake Yellowfang back into the present. Not Running Nose, she meowed. Yup. Yellowfang shook her head. But he can't even cure his own cold. That's what Greypaw said. They purred together for a moment, amused. Firepaw got to his paws. I'll leave you to rest now. Call me if you need anything else today. Yellowfang lifted her head. Before you go, Firepaw, I heard you were in a rat fight. Did they draw blood? It's okay. Spotleaf has treated my wounds with Marigold. Sometimes Marigold is not strong enough for rat bites. Go and find a patch of wild garlic to roll in. I think there's some not far from the camp entrance. That will draw any poisons the rats may have left. Although, she added dryly, your den mates might not thank me for my advice. Well, I do. Thanks, Yellowfang. Firepaw purred. Go carefully, young one. Yellowfang held his gaze for a moment, then let her chin rest on her front paws and closed her eyes. Firepaw slipped under the branches around Yellowfang's nest and headed for the gorse tunnel, in search of the wild garlic. The sun was setting now, and he could hear the queens settling their kits for the night. Where do you think you're going? Growled a voice from the shadows. It was Darkstripe. Yellowfang told me to go out and... You don't take orders from that rogue, hissed the warrior. Go and help with the repairs. No cat is to leave the camp tonight. He lashed his tail from side to side. Yes, Darkstripe, Firepaw mewed, dipping his head submissively. He turned and muttered, Dirtstripe, under his breath, and then headed toward the camp boundary, where he could see Greypaw and Ravenpaw busily patching a large hole in the wall of the greenery. How's Yellowfang? Asked Greypaw as Firepaw trotted up. She's fine. She said wild garlic would be good for my rat bites. I was on my way to find some, but Darkstripe ordered me to stay in camp, Firepaw told him. Wild garlic? mewed Greypaw. I wouldn't mind trying that. My leg still stings. I could sneak out and get some, Firepaw offered. He had resented Darkstripe's offhand treatment and welcomed the chance to outwit him. No one would notice if I slipped out of this hole here. It'd only take a couple of rabbit hops. Ravenpaw frowned, but Graypaw nodded. "We'll cover for you," he whispered. Firepaw nuzzled him gratefully and jumped out through the tear in the boundary wall. Once outside the camp, he began to make his way to the wild garlic patch, the sharp tang alluring him easily to its location. The moon was rising in the violet sky as the sun sank below the horizon. A cold breeze ruffled Firepaw's fur. Suddenly he caught a cat scent carried toward him on the wind. He sniffed cautiously. ShadowClan? No, just Tireclaw. And two other cats. He sniffed the air again. Darkstripe and Longtail. What were they doing here? What were they doing here? Curious, Firepaw dropped into a stalking position. He prowled through the undergrowth paw by paw, keeping downwind so that he was not detected. The warriors were standing in the shadow of a clump of ferns, their heads very close together. Soon Firepaw was near enough to hear them speak.
StarClan knows my apprentice has shown little promise from the start, but I never expected him to turn traitor,
growled Tireclaw. Firepaw's eyes widened and his fur prickled with shock. It sounded like Tireclaw intended to do more than just hint that Ravenpaw had betrayed the clan. How long did you say Ravenpaw was missing on the journey to Mothermouth? Asked Darkstripe.
Long enough to have traveled to ShadowClan's camp and back,
came the deputy's menacing answer. The fur on Firepaw's tail bristled angrily. That's impossible, he thought. He was with us the whole time. Longtail's voice sounded now, high-pitched with excitement. He must have told them that ThunderClan's leader and the strongest warrior had left the camp. Why else would they attack when they did?
We are the last clan to stand against ShadowClan. We must remain strong,
purred Tireclaw. His tone had become velvetly soft now. He waited in silence for a response. It was Darkstripe who answered, eagerly, as if he were still Tireclaw's apprentice, giving the correct answer to a question on hunting techniques. His words made Firepaw breathless with fear. And the clan would be better off without a traitor like Ravenpaw.
I have to say I agree with you, Darkstripe,
murmured Tireclaw, his voice heavy with emotion.
Even though he's my own apprentice. Apprentice.
He trailed off as if he were too upset to say any more. Firepaw had heard enough. Forgetting all about the wild garlic, he turned and crept as silently and as quickly as he could back toward the camp. He decided not to tell Ravenpaw what he had heard. He would be terrified. Firepaw's mind raced. What could he do? Tireclaw was the clan deputy, a great warrior, and popular with all the other cats. No one was going to listen to any accusations made by an apprentice. But Ravenpaw was in terrible danger. Firepaw shook himself, trying to clear his head. There was only one thing to do. He must tell what he had heard to Bluestar, and somehow convince her that he was telling the truth. Chapter 19. Graypaw and Ravenpaw were still patching the hole when Firepaw reached them. They had left a gap just wide enough for him to squeeze back through. No luck with the garlic, Firepaw panted as he slipped in. Darkstripe's prowling out around there. Never mind, mewed Graypaw. We can get some tomorrow. I'll go and get you some poppy from Spotted Leaf, Firepaw offered. He was worried by the dull look in his friend's eyes, and the way his muscles seemed stiff with pain. Nah, don't worry, mewed Graypaw. I'll be fine. It's no trouble, Firepaw insisted, and before Graypaw could argue, he bounded off towards Spotted Leaf's den. She was pacing her small clearing, her eyes clouded with unhappiness. Are you okay? Firepaw asked. The spirits of StarClan are restless. I think they are trying to tell me something, she replied, flicking her tail uneasily. What can I do for you? I think Graypaw could do with some poppy seeds for his leg, Firepaw explained. His rat bites are still hurting him. The pain of losing Lionheart will make his injuries feel worse, but he'll mend in time. Don't worry. In the meantime, you're right, poppy seeds will help. Spotted Leaf went into her den and brought out a dried poppy head. She placed it carefully on the ground. Just shake out one or two and give them to him, she meowed. Thanks, Firepaw mewed. Are you sure you're okay? Go and see to your friend, answered Spotted Leaf, avoiding his gaze. Firepaw picked up the poppy head between his teeth and began to walk away. Wait, Spotted Leaf hissed suddenly. Firepaw spun around expectantly and met her tawny gaze. Her eyes burned back at him. Firepaw, she hissed. StarClan spoke to me moons ago, before you joined the clan. I sense they want me to tell you this now. They said only fire can save our clan. Firepaw stared at Spotted Leaf, mystified. The strange passion faded from her eyes. Take care, Firepaw, she meowed in her normal voice, and turned away. See you, Firepaw replied uncertainly. He padded back through the fern tunnel. Her strange words were echoing in his mind, but he could not make sense of them. Why had she shared this with him? Surely fire was an enemy to all who lived in the forest. He shook his head in frustration and bounded over to the apprentice's den. Graypaw! Firepaw hissed into the ear of his sleeping friend. They'd been allowed to rest all morning after working on repairs for most of the night. Tigerclaw had ordered them to be ready to begin training at sun-high. A strong yellow light filtered through to the den, told Firepaw it was already near that now. He'd had a restless night. Dreams swirled through his mind each time he fell asleep, confusing and indistinct, but full of darkness and menace. Graypaw! Firepaw hissed again, but his friend did not stir. He'd eaten 2 of the poppy seeds before he slept, and now he was in a deep slumber. Are you awake, Firepaw? Ravenpaw mewed from his nest. Firepaw spat silently under his breath. He had wanted to talk to Graypaw before Ravenpaw awoke. Yes, he replied. Ravenpaw sat up in his bed of moss and heather and began to wash with quick flicks of his tongue. Are you going to wake him? He asked, nodding toward Graypaw. A deep voice growled outside their den. I hope so. Training's about to start. Firepaw and Ravenpaw jumped. Graypaw, wake up. Firepaw poked his friend with one paw. Tigerclaw is waiting. Graypaw lifted his head. His eyes were still heavy with sleep. Are you ready yet? Called Tigerclaw. Firepaw and Ravenpaw crept out of the den, blinking as they emerged into the sunlight. The deputy was sitting beside the tree stump. Is the other one coming? He asked. Yes, Firepaw replied, feeling defensive on behalf of his friend. He's only just woken up. Training will do him good, growled Tigerclaw. He's grieved for long enough. Firepaw held the menacing amber gaze for a few moments, warrior and apprentice. For a heartbeat their eyes were locked as enemies. Graypaw scrambled sleepily out of the den. Bluestar will be ready for you in a moment, Firepaw, announced Tigerclaw. The words distracted Firepaw from his anger. His first training session with Bluestar. Excitement surged through him. He expected his wounded mentor to be resting still. Graypaw, continued Tigerclaw, you can join my training session. Do you think you're up to it, Ravenpaw? He glowered? What? That's a strange word. After all, you've got some pretty nasty nettle stings while the rest of us were fighting those rats. Ravenpaw looked at the ground. I'm fine, he mewed. Graypaw and Ravenpaw followed the deputy out of the camp entrance. Ravenpaw's head hung low as he disappeared through the gorse tunnel. Firepaw sat and waited for Bluestar. She did not keep him long. The Grey Queen emerged from her den and padded across the clearing. Her fur was still matted in places where wounds were fresh, but she betrayed no pain in her confident stride. Come, she called to him. Firepaw noticed with surprise that she was alone. Darkstrip and Longtail were nowhere to be seen. A thought occurred to him, and suddenly his excitement was tinged with anxiety. Here was an opportunity to tell Bluestar what he had overheard last night. He caught up with her as she headed for the gorse tunnel and fell in step behind her. Will your guards be joining us? He asked hesitantly. Bluestar replied without looking back. I've ordered Darkstripe and Longtail to help with the camp repairs. Securing ThunderClan's base is our first priority. Firepaw's heartbeat quickened. He would tell her about Ravenpaw as soon as they left camp. The two cats followed the trail to the training hollow. The path was strewn with freshly fallen golden leaves that rustled beneath their paws. Firepaws' mind raced as he searched for suitable words. What should he tell his leader? The Tiger Claw was planning to get rid of his apprentice? And what would he say when Blue Star asked him why? Could he bring himself to say out loud that he suspected Tiger Claw had killed Redtail? Even though he had no evidence beyond Grandpa's excited storytelling at the gathering? By the time they reached the sandy hollow, Firepaw had still not spoken. The hollow was empty. I asked Tiger Claw to hold his training session in another part of the forest today, Blue Star explained as she padded into the center of the hollow. I want to concentrate on your fighting skills, and I want you to concentrate on them too, which means no distractions. I must tell her now, thought Firepaw. She needs to know about the danger Ravenpaw is in. His paws prickled with anxiety. I won't have another chance like this. Sudden movement flashed in the corner of his eye. A swish of gray swirled past his nose, and Firepaw fell forward as his forepaws were knocked lightly from underneath him. He staggered, regained his balance, and spun around to see Blue Star sitting calmly beside him. Do I have your attention now? She growled. Yes, Blue Star, sorry, he replied hastily, looking into her blue eyes. That's better. Firepaw, you have been with us for many moons now. I have watched you fight. With the rats you were quick, with the shot-clad warriors you were fierce. You outwitted Graypaw on that very first day we met, and you defeated Yellowfang with your cleverness too. She paused, then lowered her voice to an intense hiss. But one day you will meet an opponent who is all of these things as well, quick and fierce and clever. It's my duty to prepare you for that day. Firepaw nodded, completely caught up in her words. His senses were fully alert. All thoughts of Ravenpaw and Tigerclaw had disappeared, and the musty odors and tiny noises of the forest rushed in upon him. Let's see how you fight, Blue Star ordered. Attack me. Firepaw looked at her, sizing her up and wondering what the best way to begin. Blue Star was standing less than 3 rabbit lengths away. She was twice his size, so it would be a waste of effort to begin with the usual paw swipes and wrestling. But if he could leap straight onto her back with a powerful enough jump, he might be able to unbalance her. She didn't take her piercing blue eyes off him for an instant. Firepaw stared back and leaped. He aimed to land squarely on her shoulders, but Blue Star was ready for him. She dropped swiftly into a crouch. As Firepaw hit her, she rolled her onto her back. Instead of landing on her shoulders, he found himself crashing down toward her upturned belly. She caught him with all 4 paws and flung him easily away from her. Firepaw felt he had been bundled away like a bothersome kit. He hit the dusty ground hard and lay winded for a moment before he scrambled to his feet. Interesting strategy, but your eyes betrayed where you were aiming, growled Blue Star as she stood up and shook off the dust from her thick coat. Now try again. This time Firepaw looked at his shoulders but aimed for her paws. When Blue Star dropped to the ground, he would hit her as she crouched. Firepaw felt a rush of satisfaction as he leaped, but it turned to confusion as Blue Star unexpectedly sprang into the air and let him crash into the ground where she had stood just a heartbeat before. She timed it perfectly. As he landed, she thundered down on top of him, squashing the breath out of him. Now try something I don't expect, she hissed into his ear, climbing off him and backing away with a challenging gleam in her eyes. Firepaw scrambled up, panting, and shook himself crossly. Even Yellowfang had not been so tricky. He hissed and leaped again. This time, as he flew at Blue Star, he stretched out his 4 paws. She reared up on her hind legs and used her forepaws to twist him away. As he felt himself slipping, Firepaw scrabbled with his hind paws in the sand, but it was too late, and he flopped heavily onto his side. Firepaw, Blue Star meowed calmly, as once more he struggled to his paws. You're strong and quick, but you must learn to keep control of your speed and body weight so that it's not so easy for me to unbalance you. Try again. Firepaw backed away, hot, dusty, and out of breath. Frustration raged through him. He was determined to get the better of his mentor this time. Slowly he crouched and began to creep toward Blue Star. She mirrored his crouch and hissed into his face as he approached. He raised a paw and swiped at her left ear. She ducked to avoid his strike and reared up, towering over him. Quickly, Firepaw rolled onto his back, slithered beneath her body, and in one fast movement kicked
both his back legs upward into her belly. Bluestar was flung backward and fell into the sandy earth with a loud grunt. Firepaw flipped himself over and leaped to his paws. He felt jubilant. Then he saw Bluestar lying in the dirt. For the first time he remembered her wounds. Had he reopened them? He dashed to her side and stared down at her. To her relief, her eyes glinted proudly back at him. "That was much better," she puffed. She stood and shook herself. "Now it's my turn." She sprang at him, knocking him to the ground, then retreated and let him pick himself up before leaping again. Firepaw braced himself, but she bowled him over easily again. "Look at my size, Firepaw. Don't try to stand up against my attack. Use your wits. If you are fast enough to avoid me, then avoid me." Firepaw scrabbled to his feet again, preparing for her attack. This time he didn't dig his paws into the soft ground, but stood lightly, keeping his weight on his toes. As Bluestar flew toward him, he hopped neatly out of her path, reared up onto his hind legs, and with his forepaws pushed her flying body onward past him. Bluestar landed gracefully on all four paws and turned. "Excellent! You learn quickly," she purred. "But that was an easy move. Let's see how you deal with this one." They trained until sunset. Firepaw heaved a sigh of relief when he heard Bluestar meow. "That's enough for today." She seemed a little tired and stiff, but she leaped easily out of the sandy hollow. Firepaw scrambled after her. His muscles were aching and his head spinning with all he had learned. As they trekked together back through the trees, he couldn't wait to tell Graypaw and Ravenpaw about this training session. And it wasn't until they reached the camp boundary that Firepaw realized he'd forgotten to tell Bluestar about Ravenpaw. Oopsies! Big oopsies.
Chapter 20. By the time Firepaw returned, the camp was starting to look a little better. Parties of cats had clearly been patching and repairing continuously throughout the day. Frostfur and Goldenflower were still busy fortifying the nursery walls, but the outer wall looked solid and secure once more. Firepaw trotted across the clearing to see if there was any fresh kill around. He passed Sandpaw and Dustpaw, who were preparing to leave in the next patrol. "Sorry," mewed Sandpaw as Firepaw sniffed hopefully around the eating area. "We ate the last 2 mice." Firepaw shrugged. He would catch something for himself later. He headed back to the apprentice's den, where Graypaw was sitting with his back resting against a tree stump, licking a forepaw. "Where's Ravenpaw?" Firepaw asked as he sat down. "Not back from his task yet," replied Graypaw. "Look at that." He held out his paw for Firepaw to inspect. The pad was torn and bleeding. "Tireclaw sent me fishing and I stepped on a sharp stone in this stream." "That looks pretty deep. You should get Spotted to take a look at it," Firepaw advised. "Where did Tireclaw send Ravenpaw, by the way?" "Dunno. I was up to my belly in cold water," muttered Graypaw. He stood up and limped away toward Spotted den. Firepaw settled down, his eyes fixed on the entrance of the camp, and waited for Ravenpaw. After overhearing the warriors' conversation last night, he couldn't shake the feeling that something dreadful was going to happen to his friend. His heart lurched as he saw Tireclaw enter the camp alone. He waited longer. The moon was high in the sky. Surely Ravenpaw should be back by now. Firepaw found himself wishing he'd spoken to Bluestar when he had the chance. He could see Darkstripe and Longtail guarding her den now, and he certainly didn't want them to overhear his concerns. Tireclaw brought back his fresh kill, which he was sharing with Whitestorm outside the warrior's den. Firepaw realized that he was very hungry. Perhaps he should go and hunt. He might come across Ravenpaw outside the camp. As he wondered what to do, Firepaw saw Ravenpaw trotting through the entrance of the camp. A thrill of relief raced through him, and not just because Ravenpaw was holding fresh kill between his teeth. The apprentice came straight over to Firepaw and dropped the mouthful of food on the ground. "Enough for all 3 of us," he mewed proudly. "And it should taste extra good. It's from ShadowClan territory." Firepaw gasped. "You hunted in ShadowClan territory?" "That was my task," Ravenpaw explained. "Tireclaw sent you into enemy territory to hunt?" Firepaw could hardly believe it. "We must tell Bluestar. That was too dangerous." At the mention of Bluestar's name, Firepaw shook his head. His eyes looked hunted and shadowed with fear. "Look, just keep quiet, okay?" he hissed. "I survived. I even caught some prey. That's all there is to it." "You survived this time!" Firepaw spat. Shh! Tigerclaw's looking. Just eat your share and keep quiet, snapped Ravenpaw. Firepaw shrugged and took a piece of the fresh kill. Ravenpaw ate quickly, avoiding Firepaw's eyes. Shall we save him for Greypaw? He asked after a while. He went to see Spotted Leaf, Firepaw mumbled through a mouthful. He cut his paw. I don't know when he'll be back. Well, save him whatever you want, replied Ravenpaw, suddenly sounding worn out. I'm tired. I need to sleep. He stood up and pushed his way into the den. Firepaw stayed outside, watching the rest of the camp prepare for the night. He was going to have to tell Ravenpaw what he'd overheard in the forest last night. He needed to know just how much danger he was in. Tigerclaw was lying beside Whitestorm, sharing tongues, but with one eye fixed on the apprentice's den. Firepaw yawned to show Tigerclaw how exhausted he was. Then he got to his paws and followed Ravenpaw inside. Ravenpaw was asleep, but Firepaw could tell from his twitching paws and whiskers that he was dreaming. He knew it wasn't a good dream by the tiny mewls and squeaks that Ravenpaw was making. Suddenly the black cat leaped to his paws, his eyes stretched wide in terror. His fur was standing on end and his back was arched. Ravenpaw! Firepaw mewed in alarm. Calm down. You're in our den. There's only me here. Ravenpaw looked around wildly. It's just me, Firepaw repeated. Ravenpaw blinked and seemed to recognize his friend. He collapsed onto his bed. Ravenpaw, mewed Firepaw seriously. There's something you need to know. Something I heard last night when I was out looking for the wild garlic. Ravenpaw looked away, still trembling from his dream, but Firepaw persisted. Ravenpaw, I heard Tigerclaw telling Darkstripe and Longtail that you betrayed ThunderClan. He told them you slipped away during the trip to Mothermouth, and told ShadowClan that the camp was unguarded. Ravenpaw spun around to face Firepaw. But I didn't! He exclaimed, horrified. Of course you didn't, Firepaw agreed. But Darkstripe and Longtail believe you did, and Tigerclaw persuaded them that they should get rid of you. Ravenpaw was speechless, his breath coming in gasps. Why would Tigerclaw want to get rid of you, Ravenpaw? Firepaw asked gently. He's one of the clan's strongest warriors. What threat are you to him? Firepaw suspected he already knew the answer, but he wanted to hear the truth from Ravenpaw's own mouth. He waited while Ravenpaw fumbled for words. At last the Black Apprentice crawled closer to Firepaw and whispered hoarsely into his ear. Because the RiverClan deputy didn't kill Redtail, Tigerclaw did. Firepaw nodded silently, and Ravenpaw continued, his whisper cracking with tension. Redtail killed the RiverClan deputy, so Tigerclaw didn't kill Oakheart. Firepaw couldn't help interrupting. Ravenpaw shook his head. No, he didn't. After Redtail had killed Oakheart, Tigerclaw ordered me back to camp. I wanted to stay, but he yelled at me to go, so I ran into the trees. I should have carried on running, but I couldn't leave while they were still fighting. I turned and crept back to see if Tigerclaw needed help. At the time I got near, all the RiverClan warriors had fled, leaving just Redtail and Tigerclaw. Redtail was watching the last warrior running away, and Tigerclaw... Ravenpaw paused, then gulped. Tigerclaw jumped on him. He sank his teeth into the back of his neck, and Redtail fell to the ground, dead. That's when I ran. I don't know if Tigerclaw saw me or not. I just kept running until I got back to camp. Why didn't you tell Bluestar? Firepaw pressed gently. Would she have believed me? Firepaw's eyes rolled wildly. Do you believe me? Of course I do, Firepaw mewed. He looked Ravenpaw between the ears in an effort to calm and comfort his friend. He was going to have to find another opportunity to tell Bluestar about Tigerclaw's treachery. Don't worry, I'll sort it out, he promised. Meanwhile, make sure you stick close to me or Greypaw. Does Greypaw know about them wanting to get rid of me? Not yet, but I'll have to tell him. Ravenpaw settled silently onto his belly and stared ahead. It's okay, Ravenpaw, Firepaw purred, touching the skinny black body with his nose. I'll help you get out of this. Greypaw padded into the den at dawn. Sandpaw and Dustpaw had returned from their patrol a while ago and were asleep in their nests. Hi, mewed Greypaw, sounding more cheerful than he had for days. Firepaw woke at once. You sound better, he purred. Greypaw looked Firepaw's ears. Spotted put some gunk on my cut and made me lie still for hours. I must have fallen asleep. By the way, I hope that chaffinch out there was for me. I was starving. It was. Ravenpaw caught it yesterday. Tireclaw sent him into. Shut up, you two, growled Sandpaw. Some of us are trying to sleep. Grandpa rolled his eyes. Come on, Firepaw, he mewed. Brindleface has had her kits. Let's go and visit them. Firepaw purred with pleasure. At last, something for ThunderClan to celebrate. He looked down at Ravenpaw, who was still sleeping, and padded out of the den. With Greypaw, he trotted across the clearing toward the nursery. The rising sun had made his pelt glow with warmth, and he stretched appreciatively, reveling in the suppleness of his spine and the strength in his legs. Stop showing off, Greypaw called over his shoulder. Firepaw stopped stretching and bounded after his friend. White Storm was sitting outside the nursery, guarding the entrance.
Have you two come to see the new kits?
He meowed as Firepaw and Greypaw approached. Firepaw nodded.
One at a time only, then you'll have to wait. Blue Star's with her now.
White Storm told them. Well, you can go first, Firepaw offered. I'll go and see Yellowfang while I'm waiting. He dipped his head respectfully to White Storm and headed off toward the Yellowfang's nest. The old cat was watching behind her ears, her eyes half closed with concentration. Don't tell me you're expecting rain, Firepaw teased. Yellowfang looked up. You've been listening to too many elders' tales, she meowed. What would be the point of a cat washing its ears if they're only going to get rained on anyway? Firepaw whiskers twitched with amusement. Are you going to see Brindleface's new litter? He asked. Yellowfang stiffened as she shook her head. I don't think I'd be very welcome, she growled. But they know you saved... Firepaw began. A she-cat is very protective of her newborns, especially when it's her first litter. I think I'll stay away. Yellowfang replied in a tone that invited no argument. As you wish. But I'm going to see them. It must be a good sign having new kits in camp. Yellowfang shrugged. Sometimes, she muttered darkly. Firepaw turned and trotted back to the nursery. Clouds had covered the sun, making the air turn fresher. A fierce breeze tugged at his fur and rustled the leaves around the clearing. Bluestar was sitting outside the nursery. Behind her, Greypaw's tail was just disappearing into the narrow entrance. Firepaw, she greeted him. Have you come to see ThunderClan's newest warriors? The ThunderClan leader sounded tired and sad. Firepaw was surprised. Surely the kits were good news for ThunderClan. Yes, I have, he replied. Well, when you've finished, come and see me in my den. Yes, Bluestar. Firepaw mewed as she walked slowly away. He felt his fur prickle. Here was another chance to speak to Bluestar alone. Perhaps StarClan was on his side after all. Greypaw crawled out of the nursery entrance. They're really cute, he mewed. But I'm starving now. I'm off to find some fresh kill. I'll save some for you if I find any. He blinked affectionately at Firepaw and bounded away. Firepaw purred a goodbye and looked up at White Storm, who nodded his permission for him to enter the nursery. Firepaw squeezed through the tiny entrance. 4 tiny kits huddled warmly in Brindleface's deeply lined nest. Their fur was pale gray with darker flecks, just like their mother, except for one tiny dark gray tom. They mewled and squirmed inside Brindleface's belly, their eyes shut tight. How are you feeling? Firepaw whispered to her. A little tired, answered Brindleface. She looked down proudly at her litter. But the kits are all strong and healthy. ThunderClan is lucky to have them, Firepaw purred. I was just talking about them to Yellowfang. Brindleface didn't answer, and Firepaw couldn't miss the look of worry that flashed in her eyes as she nudged a straying kit closer to her. Firepaw felt a tremor of anxiety in his belly. Bluestar may have accepted Yellowfang into ThunderClan, but it looked like the old cat was still not trusted by all of the clan. He touched his nose affectionately to Brindleface's flank, then turned and made his way out into the clearing. The clan leader was waiting for Firepaw at the entrance to her den. Longtail sat at her side. The pale tabby warrior stared hard at Firepaw as he approached. Firepaw ignored his gaze and looked expectantly at Bluestar. Come inside, she meowed, turning to lead the way. Firepaw trotted after her. Longtail immediately stood up as if to follow them. Bluestar looked back at him over his shoulder. I think I'll be safe enough with young Firepaw, she meowed. Longtail looked uncertain for a moment, then sat down again outside the entrance. Firepaw had never been inside Bluestar's den.
He padded after her through the lichen that draped its entrance. Brindleface's kits are lovely, he purred. Bluestar looked serious. Lovely they may be, but they mean more mouths to feed, and the season of leaf bare will soon be here. Then she glanced at Firepaw, who was unable to hide his surprise at her melancholy tone. Oh, don't listen to me, meowed Bluestar, shaking her head impatiently. The first cold wind always worries me. Come, make yourself comfortable. She tipped her head toward the dry, sandy floor. Firepaw dropped onto his belly and stretched his paws out in front of him. Bluestar circled slowly on her mossy nest. I'm still aching from a training session yesterday, she admitted once she had finally settled herself and curled her tail around her paws. You fought well, young one. Yo. For once Firepaw didn't stop to bask in her praise. His heart was thumping. This was the perfect moment to tell his leader his fears about Tigerclaw. He lifted his chin, ready to speak. But it was Bluestar who spoke first, staring past him at the far wall of her den. I can still smell the stale stench of ShadowClan in the camp, she murmured. I hope to never see the day when our enemy broke into the heart of ThunderClan. Firepaw nodded in silent agreement, sensing Bluestar was going to say more. And so many deaths, she sighed. First Redtail, then Lionheart. I thank StarClan at least the warriors we have left are strong and loyal like them. At least with Tigerclaw as deputy, ThunderClan may still be able to defend itself. Firepaw's heart plummeted and an icy chill cut deep into him as Bluestar went on. There was a time when Tigerclaw was a young warrior that I feared the strength of his passion. Such energy can need careful channeling, but now I am proud to see how much respect the clan has for him. I know he is ambitious, but his ambition makes him one of the bravest casts I have ever had the honor to fight alongside. Firepaw knew at once that he could not tell Bluestar his suspicions about Tigerclaw, not when Bluestar looked to her deputy to protect the whole clan. He would have to save Ravenpaw himself. He took a deep breath and blinked slowly, so that when Bluestar turned and looked directly into his eyes, no trace of his shock and disappointment remained. Her next words were quiet and full of concern. You know, Broken Star will return. He made it clear at the gathering that he wants hunting rights in all the territories. We fought him off once. We can do it again, Firepaw insisted. That's true, Bluestar acknowledged with a wry nod. StarClan will honor your courage, young Firepaw. She paused and licked a healing wound on her side. I think you ought to know that, in the battle with the rats, it was not my 5th light that I lost, but my 7th. Firepaw sat bolt upright, shocked. Bluestar went on. I have let the clan believe it was my 5th because I don't want them to fear for my safety. But 2 more lives and I will have to leave you to join StarClan. Firepaw's mind was racing. Why was she telling him this? Thank you for sharing this with me, Bluestar, he purred respectfully. Bluestar nodded. I am tired now, she rasped. Off you go, and Firepaw, I don't expect you to repeat this conversation to anyone. Of course, Bluestar. Firepaw replied as he nosed his way out through the curtain of lichen. Longtail was sitting by the entrance. Firepaw stepped past him and made his way toward the den. He didn't know which part of his conversation with Bluestar had been more bewildering. He was stopped in his tracks by a yell of horror coming from the nursery. Phosphor came sprinting into the clearing, her tail bristling and her eyes wide with alarm. My kits! Someone has taken my kits! Tigerclaw bounded over to her. He called to the clan.
Quick, search the camp. White Storm, stay where you are. Warriors, patrol the camp boundary. Apprentices, search every den.
Firepaw rushed to the nearest den, the warriors, and pushed his way inside. It was empty. He scrabbled through the bedding with his paws, but there was neither sight nor scent of Phosphor's kits. He charged outside and headed for his own den. Ravenpaw and Greypaw were already inside, pushing inside their nests, sniffing every corner. Dustpaw and Sandpaw were searching the Elder's den. Firepaw left them to it and charged from one clump of grass to another, pushing his muzzle into them, ignoring the nettles that stung his nose. There was no sign of the kits anywhere. He looked around the camp boundary. Warriors paced backward and forward, urgently sniffing the air. Suddenly, Firepaw spotted Yellowfang in the distance. She was pushing her way through an unguarded part of fern wall. She must have found a scent, he thought, and raced toward her as her tail disappeared into the greenery. By the time he arrived at the fern wall, she had gone. He sniffed the air,
No kid scent, just the bitter smell of Yellowfang's fear. What was she afraid of? Firepaw wondered. Tireclaw's yowl sounded from the bushes behind the nursery. All the cats raced over to him, headed by Frostfur. They crowded as closely as they could, jostling to see through the dense undergrowth. Firepaw nosed his way forward and saw Tireclaw standing over a motionless bundle of dappled fur. Spotted Leaf! Firepaw stared in disbelief at her lifeless body. Fury rose in him like a dark cloud, and he felt the blood roaring in his ears. Who had done this? Bluestar stepped through the crowd and leaned over the medicine cat. She has been killed by a warrior blow, she meowed softly. Firepaw craned his neck and saw a single wound on the back of Spotted Leaf's neck. His head swam and suddenly he was unable to see clearly. Through his grief, Firepaw heard a murmur at the back of the crowd that swelled into a single piercing yowl. Yellowfang is gone! And there you have it.
That's a... Damn, every, 5 chapters is a really good cliffhanger.